In a little under 12 months, in September 2024, the Melbourne Metro Tunnel is finally expected to open, slightly ahead of schedule. This will bring an end to the 6 years of construction of one of Victoria's most significant public transport projects in recent memory. And the Metro Tunnel project will bring with it some huge benefits, including significantly boosting the railway capacity through Melbourne's heavily congested Central Business District or CBD. But the project is certainly not free from issues, and while I'll be very glad to see it open, in this video I want to look at how this project could have been done just a little bit better. Before we look at the project's issues, I think it's worth understanding why the project is being built in the first place. And to do that, we should take a very quick look at how trains got to the Melbourne CBD in the past. As Melbourne's railways grew, two key stations in the CBD were built, and then rebuilt a couple of times, to serve trains coming in from the suburbs. On the city's southern edge is Flinders Street Station, which serves the railway lines approaching the city from the east. Then, on the city's western edge sits Southern Cross Station, formerly known as Spencer Street Station, which serves the railway lines approaching from the west. In 1891, a railway viaduct was built to connect these stations, allowing trains to cross from one side of the CBD to the other and beyond for the first time. But it didn't take long for this viaduct to start getting quite busy. And so began the history of infrastructure projects trying to keep up with demand for rail travel across the Melbourne CBD. About 24 years after the viaduct was initially opened, it became clear that more capacity would be needed. So the viaduct was duplicated, bringing the total number of tracks travelling between Spencer Street and Flinders Street Station to 4, doubling the capacity. Following this, there were a number of other proposals for projects to increase capacity, including one from the 1920s that looked quite a lot like the Metro Tunnel project being built today. I'll skip over these for now, but do let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a future video on these. Ultimately though, none of these proposals got built, but as the decades went by, the capacity problem reared its head again. So, in the 1970s, construction was started on the City Loop. The City Loop aimed to address the capacity issue by building 4 new underground train tracks that ran across the northern and eastern edges of the CBD, as well as adding an additional 2 tracks to the viaduct between Flinders Street and Southern Cross Station, bringing its total number of tracks to 6. By doing this, trains entering the CBD would be able to run around it in a loop before returning in the direction from which they came. This would help deal with an imbalance where a significantly larger number of trains were coming to the city from the east than were coming from the west. And of course, the new tracks would help boost the capacity as well. Additionally, the new stations built on the CBD's north and east would make it easier for commuters to reach those parts of the city that were previously only served by the tram network. But while the City Loop improved access to the northern and eastern sides of the CBD, it would have the effect of reducing the potential for cross-city travel. Somebody wanting to travel from the city's eastern suburbs to its western ones would now need to change trains in the city, with the exception of passengers on the Frankston, Williamstown and Werribee line, which does still travel across the city. The looping pattern was also a bit inefficient in other ways. For example, somebody who works near Parliament Station, but whose train enters the loop at Flinders Street, needs to circle the whole CBD before they've reached their stop. And of course, over time, the City Loop began reaching capacity as well. This finally brings us to the Metro Tunnel, a project that aims to address at least some of the issues caused by the City Loop. The Metro Tunnel comprises of 2 new railway tracks being built in tunnels that will run from near South Yarra Station in the east, towards a new station, Anzac, being built near the War Memorial, then up to another quote-unquote new station called Town Hall, but which is really just an extension of Flinders Street Station, up again to another quote-unquote new station called State Library, which is really just an extension of Melbourne Central, before leaving the CBD to stop at the genuinely new stations of Parkville and Arden, and then finally rejoining the existing line just past South Kensington. If we're talking about issues with the project, I'll mention one right now: the lack of a station at South Yarra. While skipping South Yarra will marginally improve travel times to the CBD, it misses a chance to provide an interchange with the Sandringham train line, as well as tram routes 58 and 78, so a bit of a missed opportunity in my view. But with that said, the Metro Tunnel project does certainly address some of the big issues with rail travel in the Melbourne CBD. Of course, adding 2 new tracks through the CBD will take trains out of the city loop, freeing up significant capacity. The current plan is to take the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines out of the city loop and instead run them directly through the Metro Tunnel, linking up with the Sunbury line on the other side, which will also no longer need to run through the city loop. Removing the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines from the loop will not only create a new direct rail link from the city's east to its west, but it will also free up a whole set of loop tracks for use by other lines. Currently, it's planned to run the Frankston line through this loop, with the Sandringham line taking over the through-running services to Werribee and Williamstown. Additionally, removing the Sunbury line will give more capacity to the other lines it shared its loop track with, namely the Craigieburn and Upfield lines. Who knows, maybe they can even start getting trains more than once every 20 minutes. So, the Melbourne Metro Tunnel will undoubtedly be quite useful. It will bring new rail capacity to the Melbourne CBD and open up new routes for cross-city trips. Now, the tunnel has come at a time when a few other Australian cities have embarked on their own projects to boost CBD rail capacity. For example, the Cross River Rail project in Brisbane, and of course, the new Sydney Metro. But when we start comparing Melbourne's version to the ones being done in other Australian cities, particularly Sydney's Metro, we can begin to see where Melbourne's Metro Tunnel has missed a few opportunities. Much like the Metro Tunnel, one of the key reasons for Sydney Metro's construction was to deal with overcrowding on rail services in the central business district, by constructing a whole new underground railway through the city. But unlike the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, it didn't stop there. From the very beginning of the project, the expanded CBD capacity was only part of a broader plan to expand rail coverage to new, growing parts of the city, with an entirely new rail alignment being built out to the city's rapidly growing northwest, which had previously only been served by buses. In fact, this section of the Sydney Metro was what was built first, but what's important here is that it was always part of a broader plan, and that as soon as the northwest section of the metro was completed, the section under the CBD, including its connection to the existing Bankstown line, began construction right away. Now, the Melbourne Metro Tunnel has had some considerations for how it could be used to expand rail access outside of the CBD. The idea was thrown about to connect it to the upcoming airport line, allowing trains from the airport to run all the way to the CBD and then through it to the city's outer eastern suburbs. But this was never truly integrated as a future phase of the Melbourne Metro Tunnel project. And given the airport line project is currently on indefinite pause with the possibility of being cancelled, there's a non-insubstantial chance that this will never happen. I actually did a whole video on the Melbourne Airport Rail Link and its various challenges, which I'll link somewhere on the screen if you're interested. Personally, I'm also not convinced the small addition of convenience for some airport passengers not having to change trains in the CBD is the best use of the new rail capacity, when it could be used to expand frequent rail transit access to substantial numbers of new and growing communities. Which is why I greatly preferred one of the other ideas to make use of that additional rail capacity: electrifying the existing rail lines that run to Melton and/or Wyndham Vale. These lines are home to some of Melbourne's fastest growing new suburbs, but they are currently only served by regional diesel trains that often run with pretty poor frequencies, and only run to Southern Cross Station rather than running across the central business district. But, while the electrification of these lines and then running their trains through the Metro Tunnel were talked about as potential options, they were never properly integrated into the Metro Tunnel project. And now, the plans have been dropped, with no indication of when or even if they'll be picked up again. So, this leaves us with the Metro Tunnel set to open in less than 12 months, and only a half-baked set of ideas of how we can make the most out of it. Meanwhile, Sydney is set to open the CBD section of its Metro project at a similar time, with whole new communities gaining frequent and direct rail access to the city. Ultimately, the Metro Tunnel is a necessary project if Melbourne wants to avoid severe overcrowding on the rail lines running through its CBD. But in its current state, it's a wasted opportunity. From the start, it should have been bundled with plans to provide more of Melbourne with frequent rail transport, much like was the case with the Sydney Metro. And while there were potential ideas for such plans, because they were never integrated into the Metro Tunnel project, we are now less than 12 months away from the project's launch, with basically no idea of what a new suburban connection to the tunnel could look like, or if there will ever even be one. Well, I hope you enjoyed this trip through Melbourne's Metro Tunnel. I want to know what you guys think about how we could make better use of the tunnel, like what suburban connections would you like to see built? I'd also like to give a shout out to the channel Sydney Trains Vlogs, whose great footage has formed some of the background of this video. I'll add a link to that channel in the description if you're interested. And of course, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more stuff like this. I'm City Moose, thanks for watching.